The specific individual you cherish conversing with is currently discussing you with a third party. And this is a revelation you absolutely need to process. Finding this message was not a random accident. It was destined to find you. Right now, there is a distinct person living in your mind. This is someone whose name drifts into your thoughts without any conscious effort. Someone whose dialogues you replay over and over. You analyze them in the solitude of the night, even if you spend your days pretending they do not matter. And here's the unvarnished truth you were not prepared for. The person you enjoy engaging with is actively talking about you to someone else. This is not casual banter, nor is it a joke or a trivial mention. They are speaking of you because you have invaded their emotional territory. This is not a phenomenon that occurs lightly. Human beings do not weave others into their narratives unless those individuals have already stamped an imprint on their soul. One does not speak of another unless their inner world has been shaken. And whether you are aware of it or not, you have caused that exact disruption. Let us pause and slow this down, because the dynamics beneath the surface are infinitely deeper than they appear. There is a profound reason you are sensing this gravitational pull at this very second, a subtle shift you might not have been able to explain. You may have noticed that their words stay with you longer than before. That small interactions suddenly feel heavier, more meaningful. That silence between messages carries weight instead of neutrality. That their presence feels close, even when they're not speaking. This is not imagination. This is not wishful thinking. This is emotional attention looping back to you. When someone talks about you to another person, especially in an emotional context, something activates internally. Thoughts repeat. Curiosity deepens. The nervous system starts associating safety, intrigue, or comfort with your presence. And when that happens, energy moves. Attention doesn't stay linear. It travels. That's why you suddenly feel closer to them. That's why you sense them thinking about you. That's why their absence feels louder than it should. Because you are being carried into conversations you were never present for. And the mind is powerful. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." Talking about you is not avoidance, but it is a way of approaching something they're not ready to face directly yet. So, what are they actually saying about you? Not surface-level things, not basic description. They're not just mentioning your name. They're expressing confusion mixed with emotion. Things like, "I don't know why, but talking to them feels different." Or, "They understand me in a way most people don't." Or, "I feel calm when I talk to them, and I don't know why." Or, "There's something about them I can't explain." Sometimes they ask questions about you. Sometimes they defend you without realizing it. Sometimes they compare you to others, and you come out on top without effort. Even when they try to sound neutral, emotion leaks through and the person they're talking to notices. That's an important detail, because emotions you try to hide are often the loudest to outsiders. Now, here's where honesty comes in. Why are they talking to someone else instead of you? It's not because they don't care. It's because they care more than they know how to handle. Talking about you is how they process what they're feeling. It's how they test the reality of their emotions without risking exposure. It's how they gain reassurance, perspective, or courage without standing emotionally naked in front of you. They may be afraid of ruining what already exists, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of moving too fast, afraid of rejection, afraid of revealing something they can't take back. So instead of speaking to you, they speak around you. But make no mistake, you are the center of the conversation, even when you're not in the room. And there's something else that matters. This isn't one-sided. You can tell because of the way they interact with you. They ask questions that go slightly deeper than necessary. They remember small details you forgot you shared. They reference things you said weeks or months ago. They subtly mirror your tone, your humor, your emotional rhythm. That doesn't happen accidentally. That's someone who has already studied you emotionally. When someone talks about you to others, they begin seeing you from multiple angles, not just through their own feelings. That multiplies attachment, and attachment always reveals itself through attention. Here's something you might not realize. The person they're talking to already knows something is going on. They might tease them. They might say things like, "You talk about them a lot," or "Just tell them already," or "You smile when you say their name." Even if it's subtle, the truth shows itself from the outside. Sometimes, that other person becomes a mirror, reflecting feelings your person hasn't consciously admitted yet. And that reflection changes how they see you. This is why timing matters. If you confront them now, demand clarity, or push for definition, you may interrupt something that is still forming, because what's happening is quiet but powerful. They are moving from curiosity into emotional investment. And that middle stage is delicate. If you let it breathe, it deepens. If you pressure it, it retreats. Right now, the connection is growing in the subconscious space, the place where feelings become real before words ever do. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Right now, something unconscious is unfolding, and forcing it into the conscious too soon can break its natural rhythm. So, what should you do? Nothing dramatic, nothing strategic, nothing performative. Do not change who you are. Do not chase. Do not disappear. Do not test them. Do not pull away to provoke a reaction. Stay authentic. Stay warm without overextending. Respond without pursuing. Let conversations flow as they naturally do. Your calm presence is what made them talk about you in the first place. You feel safe to think about. You feel easy to be with. You don't overwhelm their nervous system. That is rare, and that is powerful. What's forming here isn't loud. It's not chaotic. It's not fueled by adrenaline or fantasy. It's something slow or heavier, more grounded. And the moment will come when talking about you is no longer enough. One day, their messages will change, not in volume, but in weight. They'll linger. They'll open up. They'll ask questions that aren't just curious, but personal. Questions that reveal intention instead of interest. That shift happens when the emotional pressure reaches a point where only you can relieve it. When indirect processing turns into direct action. And here's a truth you might not be ready to hear yet. Sometimes the reason they talk about you to someone else is because they're trying to convince themselves not to fall. But the more they talk, the more real you become. You stop being an idea. You stop being a possibility. You become a presence. And once that happens, there is no going back to casual. This connection feels quiet but heavy for a reason. It's not dramatic attraction. It's not chaotic desire. It's slow building attachment. The kind that establishes trust before intensity, emotional safety before expression, depth before declaration. That's why it feels calm but unfinished. That's why it lingers. That's why you're here, listening to this now. And this is only the beginning. And here's where it deepens even further. Because what's happening now is no longer just emotional curiosity. It's internal conflict. When someone starts talking about you to others repeatedly, with feeling, with detail, with hesitation in their voice, they are no longer neutral. They are negotiating with themselves. One part of them wants closeness. Another part wants control. And the space between those two forces is where tension lives. You might feel this as mixed signals. Moments of warmth followed by distance. Depth followed by restraint. Interest followed by silence. And it's easy to misread that as confusion or inconsistency. But in reality, it's regulation. They are trying to manage something that has begun to matter more than they expected. You see, attachment doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in quietly, through familiarity, safety, resonance, through the feeling of being seen without effort. And once someone realizes, this person affects me, they don't immediately move toward it. Often they pause, because influence feels like risk. They start asking themselves questions they didn't plan to face. Why does this person stay in my mind? Why do I care what they think? Why does their attention feel different from everyone else's? Why does silence from them feel louder than silence from others? And instead of bringing those questions to you, they bring them to someone safer, someone who isn't the source of the feeling, someone who won't change the dynamic just by listening. That's why the conversations about you matter so much. They are rehearsals, emotional rehearsals. Each time they talk about you, they give the feeling more structure, more reality, more weight. Carl Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power predominates, their love is lacking." Right now, they are trying to keep power over their emotions. But love has already entered the room, quietly. This is also why you might feel a strange sense of being observed, not watched in a literal way, but held in awareness. You might notice they're more attentive than before, more responsive to your emotional cues, more sensitive to shifts in your tone or energy. That's because once someone discusses you with others, they begin seeing you, not just as a person they interact with, but as a subject of meaning. You become symbolic. You represent something in their inner world. Comfort, possibility, risk, depth, sometimes all at once. And that's heavy. So let's talk about something subtle but crucial. The difference between attraction and attachment. Attraction is stimulating. It's exciting. It wants movement, expression, immediacy. Attachment is stabilizing. It wants safety, consistency, emotional coherence. What's forming here is not driven by impulse. It's driven by integration. You fit into their emotional landscape in a way that doesn't disrupt it, and that's precisely why it scares them. People are used to intensity signaling importance, but true significance often feels calm. And calm can feel unfamiliar to someone who associates desire with chaos. So they test it. They talk about you. They listen to how your name sounds out loud. They notice how their body reacts when they describe you. They pay attention to whether they defend you instinctively, whether they smile without meaning to, whether their tone softens. Those reactions tell them more than logic ever could. Meanwhile, you might be wondering what you did to cause this. And the answer is, nothing extraordinary in appearance, but everything in presence. You didn't try to impress. You didn't overperform. You didn't chase. You were emotionally available without being intrusive, curious without being demanding, warm without being overwhelming. That combination creates psychological safety. And psychological safety is the foundation of attachment. This is why the connection feels unfinished. Because attachment doesn't complete itself in silence. It eventually seeks expression. But it does so only when the person feels strong enough to risk vulnerability. Until then, they circle it. They process it. They speak it into existence with others. And there's something important for you to understand here. Silence does not mean stagnation. Silence often means internal movement. Some of the deepest decisions people make happen quietly, without announcement, without evidence, without witnesses. You may not see them choosing you yet, but they are orienting toward you emotionally. And orientation always comes before action. This is also why you shouldn't try to speed things up by pulling away or becoming distant to trigger pursuit. That tactic works only on surface-level attraction, on ego-based interest. What's forming here responds to consistency, to grounded presence, to emotional steadiness. When you remain yourself, you allow their internal process to complete naturally. You allow curiosity to become clarity. You allow processing to become courage. And when that moment arrives, It won't feel sudden to them. It will feel inevitable. They won't come to you with confusion. They'll come with intention. Because at some point, talking about you will no longer relieve the pressure. At some point, silence will feel heavier than risk. And that's when people act. Carl Jung also said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Something has already reacted. Something has already changed. Not just in them, in you too. You're more aware, more attuned, more present. You feel the connection without needing proof. That's because something mutual is already in motion, and the story is still unfolding. There is another layer to this that most people never talk about, because it happens beneath words, beneath intention, beneath logic. When someone speaks about you to others repeatedly, emotionally, they are not only processing feelings, they are unconsciously building an inner relationship with you. An internal version of you begins to exist in their psyche, and that internal presence starts influencing how they think, how they feel, and how they regulate themselves. This is why the connection feels alive even when nothing is happening on the surface. They might be going about their day, talking to other people, doing normal things, yet your presence subtly colors their emotional state. They feel steadier after talking to you, more reflective, more aware, or sometimes more unsettled, because you touch something they haven't named yet. That's the paradox. You feel safe to them, but you also destabilize the old emotional order they were comfortable with, and that creates tension. You may notice that when you don't respond immediately, they don't get angry, but they notice. When you're warm, they soften. When you're neutral, they become more attentive. When you open up slightly, they hold on to it. These aren't conscious strategies. These are attachment markers, signs that your emotional presence is being tracked internally. This is also why they can't stop talking about you, because each time they do, they are trying to understand why you affect them the way you do. Carl Jung once said, "The soul is born, but grows young." That is the comedy of life. What's happening here is not new desire. It's old emotional material being activated through a new person. Through you, you're touching unresolved places, places of longing, places of safety that were never fully experienced, places of connection that were postponed or avoided in the past. That's why their reactions feel disproportionate to the time you've known each other. It's not about duration, it's about resonance. When resonance occurs, the psyche responds quickly. This is also why you shouldn't interpret their hesitation as lack of interest. In fact, hesitation often signals depth. Shallow interest rushes forward. Deep interest slows down because there's more to lose. They are measuring the emotional cost of honesty. And honesty feels dangerous when something matters. So they stay in the in-between, close enough to feel you, distant enough to feel safe, talking about you, but not yet speaking to you in the way they want. That in-between space is uncomfortable, but it's fertile. It's where fantasies collapse into reality, where projections are tested, where emotional truth begins to separate from illusion. This is important because many connections fail at this stage. Not because they weren't real, but because someone tried to force clarity before clarity was ready to exist. Right now, their feelings are real, but still unintegrated. They haven't decided what you mean to them yet, but they know you mean something, and meaning is the seed of attachment. You might also notice something else. They listen more than they speak. Or when they speak, they choose their words carefully. Or they circle topics instead of confronting them directly. That's not avoidance, that's self-protection. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to reveal too much too soon. They don't want to disturb the balance they feel when they talk to you. So they test themselves elsewhere. They talk about you to hear their own feelings out loud. They gauge reactions. They check whether what they feel sounds real when spoken. And each time, it becomes more real. At the same time, you are not passive in this process. Even if you're doing nothing consciously, your presence is shaping the dynamic. Your steadiness allows their nervous system to relax. Your consistency makes you feel reliable. Your lack of pressure gives their emotions room to breathe. That's why doing less is doing more right now. You don't need to be impressive. You don't need to be mysterious. You don't need to be distant or overly available. You just need to remain grounded in yourself. Because what they're responding to is not effort, it's coherence. They sense that you are emotionally aligned with yourself, that you don't need to chase validation, that you don't require intensity to feel secure. And that signals something powerful to the unconscious. It signals safety without control, connection without chaos. For someone who has learned to associate closeness with instability, this feels unfamiliar, even threatening at times. So they slow down, they analyze, they hesitate, they talk. But every conversation about you tightens the emotional thread. You might feel moments where the connection feels almost tangible, as if something is about to be said, but isn't. As if there's a pause hanging in the air. That's the threshold, the space just before articulation. And it's uncomfortable because it demands patience. But here's the truth. Emotional processes that are allowed to complete themselves tend to last. Those that are rushed tend to collapse. This is not a game. It's not manipulation. It's not strategy. It's two nervous systems gradually aligning. One more thing matters here: the role of projection. When someone talks about you to others, they are also projecting parts of themselves onto you: hopes, longings, fears, unexpressed needs. But projection is not fake. It's the psyche's way of revealing what wants to be lived. Over time, projection either dissolves or transforms into real intimacy. And that transformation only happens through continued, authentic interaction. That's why staying yourself is essential. You allow them to see you clearly, not as an idea, but as a real person. And when projection meets reality and still holds, attachment deepens. Carl Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In the same way, everything that draws them to you is teaching them something about who they are becoming. You are not just someone they like. You are part of their psychological development right now, and that is not something they can ignore forever. The longer this unfolds, the more difficult it becomes to keep you in the background of their life. At some point, the internal relationship demands an external one. But that point arrives naturally, not by force. So if you feel the connection, but don't see movement yet, understand this. Movement is happening internally. Decisions are forming quietly. Emotional structures are shifting. And silence in this case is not absence. It's preparation. There is a moment in every quiet connection where the mind can no longer carry what the heart has already accepted. That moment hasn't arrived yet, but it is approaching, and you can feel it even if you can't name it. This is the stage where emotions stop being abstract and start asking for direction. Up until now, they've been able to contain what they feel by talking about you, by circling the feeling instead of stepping into it. But containment has a limit. The psyche can only hold unresolved meaning for so long before it demands resolution. And that demand doesn't arrive as urgency. It arrives as discomfort. They begin to feel restless, not anxious in a dramatic way, but subtly unsettled. They might feel a pull toward you that doesn't have a clear reason. They might catch themselves wanting to share things with you first. They might feel slightly disappointed when interactions stay surface level, even if nothing is wrong. That's because the internal relationship has grown beyond what the external one currently allows. This is also when people start testing closeness without naming it. They may share something slightly more personal, or ask a question that reveals vulnerability without declaring intention. or linger in conversation longer than necessary. They are testing safety, and how you respond in these moments matters more than anything you could say intentionally. Not because you need to perform correctly, but because your natural response gives them information. If you stay grounded, receptive, and authentic, their nervous system learns something crucial. That closeness with you doesn't cost them stability. And once the nervous system learns that, the fear begins to dissolve. This is why rushing is unnecessary. The process is already moving forward. Quietly, steadily. Internally, you might notice they become more consistent, or more thoughtful, or more emotionally present, even if they don't explicitly label it. They might reference future moments casually, or check in without a clear reason, or share something and then watch your reaction closely. These are not random behaviors. These are signs of emotional orientation. They are slowly aligning their behavior with what they already feel. At the same time, there may be moments where they pull back slightly, not because interest has faded, but because the closeness has registered, and registration triggers self-awareness. Self-awareness triggers caution. This push and pull can feel confusing if you expect linear progress, but emotional development is rarely linear. It spirals, it revisits, it integrates. What matters is direction, not speed. And the direction here is inward, toward truth. One of the most important things to understand right now is that silence does not equal passivity. Silence can be a form of internal work. Some people think through action. Others think through stillness. This person is thinking through stillness. They are asking themselves questions they've avoided in the past. Questions about what they want, about what they're ready for, about whether they can allow themselves to feel deeply without losing themselves. You are not the cause of their uncertainty. You are the catalyst for their clarity. And clarity takes time when it matters. This is also why it's essential not to interpret their pace as a lack of desire. Desire that wants to last often moves carefully. It wants to be sure it's not just reacting, but choosing. There's a difference between being pulled towards someone and deciding to move toward them. Right now, they are being pulled. The decision is forming, and decisions that form quietly tend to be firm. You may also notice something happening within yourself, a shift from anticipation to calm knowing, from questioning to acceptance, from wanting certainty to trusting the process. That's not resignation, that's alignment. When two people are emotionally aligned, there is less urgency, not because nothing matters, but because something real is taking shape. You don't feel the need to chase because you sense movement. You don't feel the need to demand clarity because you feel intention building. You don't feel the need to protect yourself excessively because the connection doesn't feel threatening. That internal state is important. It mirrors what's happening in them. Connections deepen when both people feel regulated, not reactive. And here's something subtle but profound. At this stage, the bond is being formed not through words, but through emotional memory. Every calm interaction, every moment of mutual understanding, every exchange that feels easy but meaningful. These moments are being stored. Later, when they look back, they won't remember exact conversations. They'll remember how they felt with you. Safe, seen, grounded, understood. That memory becomes the anchor. So when the moment finally comes for them to speak directly, it won't feel impulsive. It will feel like recognition, like something aligning externally with what has already been true internally. They won't come to you unsure. They'll come to you because the alternative, staying silent, will no longer make sense. Until then, your role is simple, though not always easy. Remain yourself. Not guarded, not overgiving, not performative, just present. Trust that what's unfolding does not require interference. Trust that emotional gravity works quietly. Trust that people move toward what feels real when they are ready to live it. This is not a connection built on urgency. It's built on depth, and depth takes time to surface. The story is still moving forward, quietly, intentionally, inevitably. There comes a point when inner movement can no longer stay hidden. When the quiet processing reaches its limit. When the distance between what is felt and what is expressed becomes too uncomfortable to maintain. This is where things change. Up until now, the connection has lived mostly in the unseen, in thoughts not shared, in conversations you never heard, in pauses filled with meaning. But eventually, the psyche seeks alignment. What is carried internally wants to be lived externally. And when that moment approaches, something subtle happens first. They stop trying to manage the feeling. You may notice they become less guarded, less strategic, less careful about appearing unaffected. The tone shifts, the energy softens. The interaction becomes less filtered, not louder, but more honest. This is the stage where control gives way to truth. They no longer need to ask others what they feel, because the answer has become clear. They no longer need to convince themselves not to fall, because resistance has grown heavier than surrender. At this point, silence stops being protective and starts feeling like loss. And people act when silence begins to feel like loss. You might sense a change in how they look at you, even through words. A longer pause before responding. A deeper presence in conversation. A desire to stay connected beyond the moment. This is not a sudden realization. It's the result of everything that has already happened, quietly. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." For a while, they resisted naming what you mean to them. But resistance only strengthens what is real. And now what persists is asking to be acknowledged. This is where many people misunderstand love. They think love begins with confession, with declaration, with bold gestures. But love often begins long before that. It begins when someone rearranges their inner world to make room for another person. When they adjust emotionally, without being asked. When they carry someone into their private thoughts. When they speak their name in rooms where that person is not present. That has already happened here. So when they finally turn toward you directly, it won't feel dramatic. It will feel natural, as if something that was always there has finally been spoken. They won't come with grand explanations. They'll come with presence, with intention, with a different quality of attention. And you'll recognize it immediately, because it will feel familiar, like something you've already known. This is why patience has mattered, because what arrives after patience tends to stay. What arrives after pressure tends to collapse. You didn't need to prove yourself. You didn't need to chase clarity. You didn't need to compete for attention. You didn't need to do more. You simply allowed space for something real to grow. And that says something important about you. You are not someone people forget quietly. You are not someone people feel casually. You are not someone who passes through unnoticed. You enter people's inner lives. You leave traces. You provoke reflection. You awaken parts of them that were dormant. That's why this connection feels different. Because it is different. And if you're wondering whether this will lead somewhere tangible, understand this. Emotional processes that reach this depth do not simply disappear. They transform. They move forward. They demand expression. Whether that expression comes as words, actions, or presence, it will come. Because once someone has carried you this deeply, there is no returning to indifference. Carl Jung also said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people." You have encountered this person in a realm of genuine authenticity, and that level of truth fundamentally transforms people. Allow this process to evolve naturally, without the heavy burden of fear, for you are exactly where you need to be. You are not lagging behind schedule. You are not simply idling in a state of confusing limbo. Rather, you are positioned at the very center of a connection that is actively coalescing. When the time finally comes for them to bridge the gap and step forward, it won't feel like a sudden start. It will feel like a seamless resumption. It will feel like a destiny that has been journeying toward you all along is finally docking at its intended harbor. If these words struck a chord within your soul today, I ask you to take one small, deliberate action to seal this realization. Drop the word aware in the comment section below to claim this insight and acknowledge your growth. If you felt perceived, validated, or emotionally understood by this video, please hit the like button so the algorithm pushes this clarity to others who are drowning in confusion. Make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, as every piece of content here is crafted to deepen your grasp of love, attachment styles, and the complexities of the human mind. Finally, send this to a friend who is currently analyzing silence, decoding mixed signals, or act through emotional distance. Because sometimes, a single perspective shift is all it takes to change everything.